January 30th, 1944, Anzio beachhead, Italy. Deep inside a German command bunker, Lieutenant Vera Hoffmann watched through his observation periscope, his hand trembling as he wrote in his report. The Americans possess artillery of unimaginable power. Bunker Louisa no longer exists. 4 feet of reinforced concrete gone in an instant. Through the smoke, he saw only a crater where a strong point, a position rated to withstand direct hits from 210mm shells, had stood for 8 months. 32 men of the 3rd Panzer Grenadier Division had vanished along with tons of steel and concrete, deleted from existence by a single round fired from beyond visual range. The weapon responsible was the M1 240mm Howitzer, making its combat debut with the 697th Field Artillery Battalion. In the coming months, German defenders across the European theater would discover that every assumption about fixed fortification warfare had become obsolete overnight. The U.S. Army had deployed a gun that could transform the strongest, deepest bunker into a tomb with terrifying mathematical precision. The need for such a weapon was recognized in a 1940 U.S. Army Ordnance study, which starkly concluded that existing American artillery, even the largest 155mm long toms, could not reliably defeat the heavily reinforced concrete bunkers that defined the German defensive doctrine. The specifications demanded seemed impossible. A mobile gun firing a massive 360-pound shell more than 14 miles, with the accuracy needed to hit individual bunkers and capable of penetrating 6 feet of reinforced concrete. Unlike the massive, slow railway guns of World War I, the weapon that emerged from the WWII arsenal in New York was a masterpiece of engineering. Weighing 64,700 pounds in its firing position, the M1 required a specialized crew of 14 men and could fire 1 round every 3 minutes at peak efficiency. The gun's barrel alone weighed 23,000 pounds and measured 35 feet long, requiring its own 6-wheeled transport wagon. Setting up this monster was a grueling process, averaging 8 hours and requiring the excavation of a recoil pit and assembly using a specialized M2 crane. Production began in 1942, and by 1944, WWII was manufacturing 13 guns per month, ultimately building 315 units. Each gun cost $380,000, equivalent to 12 Sherman tanks, but their strategic value proved incalculable. The 697th and 698th Field Artillery Battalions brought the first M1 howitzers into combat at the Anzio beachhead in January 1944, where the surrounding hills had been transformed into a German fortress system. On January 30th, the 697th fired the first combat round, striking a German observation post over 13 miles away. The bunker, along with its crew and equipment, simply ceased to exist. The psychological impact was immediate. Major Herman E. Smith, commanding the 697th, documented that German prisoners reported complete demoralization. They spoke of earthquake shells that made the ground shake for hundreds of meters around the impact zone, and many troops refused to occupy bunkers after witnessing the strikes. The mathematics of destruction at Anzio spoke for themselves. 67 bunkers engaged, 61 confirmed destroyed, with an average of only 4.8 rounds required per bunker. The war diary of the German 715th Infantry Division, captured after the liberation of Rome, noted, "American super-heavy artillery makes our fortified positions untenable. Losses from single shells exceed those from day-long conventional bombardments." The power of the 240mm howitzer was decisively demonstrated during the breakthrough at Monte Cassino in May 1944. The Gustav Line had held against repeated Allied assaults for months, anchored on the ancient monastery that German paratroopers had transformed into an impregnable fortress. The 240th Field Artillery Battalion, equipped with 8 M1 howitzers, joined Operation Diadem, positioning their guns to reach every German position along the line, targeting the reinforced bunkers built into the mountainside. British Major General Francis Tucker reported that the American super heavy guns achieved what months of bombing and conventional artillery had failed to accomplish. Each round that struck eliminated a strongpoint completely, and the psychological effect on the defenders, who understood that nowhere was safe, was decisive. The howitzers fired continuously for 72 hours, and post-battle analysis showed that of 43 major bunkers targeted, 39 were completely destroyed. The 4 surviving positions had been abandoned by their crews after near misses. The effectiveness of the M1 stemmed not just from the massive shell, but from the entire American fire control system. The Fire Direction Center, or FDC concept, allowed for unprecedented accuracy. Forward observers equipped with SCR 610 radios could call for fire from positions miles away. Trained personnel at the FDC used graphical firing tables, slide rules, and meteorological data to compute firing solutions, often delivering rounds onto targets over 14 miles away within 4 minutes of a call. The time-on-target technique multiplied the psychological impact. Multiple batteries firing at staggered times could ensure all their shells impacted simultaneously. A German bunker might receive 6 240mm rounds over a ton of high explosive, arriving without warning. Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Hedkin explained the doctrine. "We don't fire barrages, we conduct surgical strikes. A forward observer identifies a specific bunker, and we drop 1 or 2 rounds directly on it. The precision terrifies the Germans more than volume of firewood." This surgical precision was instrumental in the breakthrough from the Normandy beachhead during Operation Cobra in July 1944. The 352nd Infantry Division had created a defensive maze around Saint-Lô, but the 272nd Field Artillery Battalion systematically destroyed the German strongpoints. When an observer called in the coordinates on Hill 122, a key terrain feature, the resulting 3 rounds for effect left just a hole in the hillside where the bunker had been. Elite German paratrooper divisions who had fought at Cassino began abandoning prepared positions rather than face the 240mm bombardment. General Richard Schimpf, their commander, told interrogators, "Your super heavy artillery made static defense impossible. My men, veterans who had never retreated, ran from their bunkers."
In the assault on the Gothic line in northern Italy, the howitzer proved its value in mountain warfare. German engineers had spent a year building fortifications along the Apennine ridges. By positioning their howitzers in the valleys, the 697th Field Artillery Battalion could use high-angle fire to drop shells almost vertically onto German positions carved into the reverse slopes of the mountains. The destruction of the Futa Pass fortifications, defended by elaborate bunker complexes, demonstrated this capability. An ammunition handler wrote home that the shells go up so high they disappear into the clouds, then come straight down on the German bunkers. The explosion shakes the entire mountain. The pass fell in 5 days, with German casualties from bunker collapses exceeding those from direct combat. The systematic destruction of the Siegfried Line, or West Wall, was the 240mm howitzer's greatest contribution to Allied victory. This defensive line comprised over 18,000 bunkers and pillboxes. The first major test came near Aachen, where the 265th Field Artillery Battalion fired 238 rounds in 6 hours, destroying 19 of 22 targeted bunkers. A forward observer reported, "Each 240mm hit was like a small earthquake. Concrete bunkers we'd been told would take days to reduce were gone in minutes. The Germans inside never had a chance." The pattern repeated across the front. The 278th Field Artillery Battalion destroyed 73 bunkers in the Schneifel region, and the 698th eliminated the fortress ring around Metz, firing over 3,000 rounds in 2 weeks. The immense destructive power came from 2 primary shell types. The M17 concrete-piercing shell used a hardened steel cap backed by 360 pounds of mass, traveling at 2,300 feet per second. The resulting pressure surpassed any concrete's compression strength. More critically, the delayed fuse allowed the shell to penetrate 3 to 6 feet before detonation. The explosion created sympathetic fracturing, with shock waves reflecting off steel reinforcement, shattering entire structures from within. The high-explosive M114 shell contained 49 pounds of TNT and created craters 50 feet wide and 20 feet deep. The operation of the M1 240mm howitzer required extraordinary logistical support that demonstrated American industrial mobilization. Each battalion needed 18 to 36 tons of shells daily, and the ammunition supply chain stretched over 3,000 miles from Watervliet Arsenal to the front lines. By March 1945, the U.S. Army had stockpiled over 500,000 240mm rounds in European depots. Monthly consumption peaked at 35,000 rounds during the Rhine crossings. This capacity, mass production of precision, super-heavy ammunition, was unmatched by Germany, Japan, or the Soviet Union. The American advantage lay not just in quantity, but in mobility. While German and Soviet super-heavy guns often required rail transport, the M1 could be towed by tracked vehicles and placed almost anywhere with suitable ground. The Rhine crossings in March 1945 saw the howitzer at peak effectiveness. Operation Plunder was preceded by the largest artillery preparation of the Western War. The 240mm howitzers began the systematic destruction of the Wesel fortified zone, engaging each position with 4 to 6 rounds. One battery commander recorded that they had destroyed 31 bunkers by midnight. The infantry crossing met little resistance, and German survivors reported complete demoralization after watching their fortifications disintegrate. The same fate befell the industrial facilities converted into fortresses in the Ruhr pocket. One forward observer reported the fortified steel works with 3-foot-thick walls went through them like tissue paper. Operating the M1 240mm howitzer demanded exceptional teamwork and physical endurance. A 14-man crew was a precisely coordinated team, with every member essential. The 360-pound projectile was lifted by a crane, guided by 4 men into the breach, and then rammed home hydraulically. A well-trained crew could complete the entire loading process in 90 seconds. The physical demands were immense. The concussion from firing was like being punched in the chest, one handler recalled. The forward observers held one of the war's most dangerous jobs, positioned on the front lines, often beyond friendly lines, to adjust fire with lethal precision. They carried heavy equipment, including a 20-power scope and a 48-pound radio. Their casualty rate was a brutal 58%, the highest of any artillery specialty. Yet the power they commanded was intoxicating. One observer reflected, calling in 240mm was like summoning Thor's hammer. I'd identify a bunker, radio the coordinates, and minutes later, it would cease to exist. Captured German documents consistently revealed the terror inspired by this precision bombardment. The Wehrmacht, conditioned by years of mass artillery bombardment on the Eastern Front, was unprepared for American surgical strikes. German defensive instructions were rapidly reversed, emphasizing dispersion and camouflage over static fortification. One captured German commander summarized the frustration: "We were not just outgunned, but outclassed. The precision of their heavy artillery made every defensive position vulnerable." The Soviet Marshal Vasily Chukoy, the defender of Stalingrad, examined destroyed Siegfried Line bunkers and commented, "The Americans found the solution to modern fortifications, not mass, but precision, one gun achieving what 100 of ours could not." When Germany surrendered in May 1945, the M1 240mm howitzer had made a decisive contribution to victory. Final U.S. Army Ordnance statistics recorded 118,429 rounds fired in the European theater. Of 3,847 enemy fortifications engaged, 3,114 were confirmed destroyed, an 81% success rate. General Dwight D. Eisenhower wrote that the weapon gave us the ability to crack any defensive position quickly and economically. It saved thousands of Allied lives. Field Marshal Albert Kesselring, the German commander in Italy, offered the enemy's perspective. The American 240mm gun was a weapon against which we had no answer. Our bunkers, built at enormous cost, became death traps. The psychological effect was devastating. The M1 240mm howitzer represented American industrial philosophy at its most effective, the overwhelming firepower of mass production delivered with precision. The comparison to German Wunderwaffen is instructive. While Germany produced individual masterpieces like the 800mm Dora railway gun, America mass-produced an effective, mobile weapon. The 240mm howitzer was the voice of American industry, proclaiming inevitable victory, and its message was unmistakable. There is no defensive position that cannot be destroyed, and no bunker that cannot become a tomb. This was the triumph of industrial democracy over totalitarianism. The greatest victory of the 240mm howitzer was not the fortifications it destroyed, but the minds it changed, convincing the enemy that resistance was genuinely futile.